Hi, welcome. I'm Krista Campbell. Thank you for joining us today for What is Insights for ArcGIS. As you probably know, this is the first webinar in our three-part series focused on insights for ArcGIS. We will host two more webinars, Spatial BI, How Customers Have Used Insights, and Insights for ArcGIS, It's All About Data and Analytics. Today's webinar will introduce you to Insights for ArcGIS. It will focus on the concepts and analysis that allow in-depth exploration of data. In addition, there will be a discussion about the technical requirements to run insights. My colleague, Derek Lorbecki, is going to lead the webinar. Derek is a solutions engineer on the global water practice, and he is our subject matter expert for Insights for ArcGIS. If you attended the Esri UC this past summer, you're going to recognize Derek because he was on the main stage during the plenary and presented to the attendees. Very exciting stuff. Before we get started though, I want to encourage you to post your questions. We're going to have plenty of time at the end of the webinar to answer them. If we don't get to your question, we will include the written Q&A follow-up document on GeoNet after the webinar. The webinar is being recorded, so we're going to have that available to you and any of your colleagues in about a week or 2 weeks, and you'll get an email that includes a link to where you can find the recording. That's all I have, so let's get started. Derek?
All right, thanks, Krista. So, like Krista said, this is the first of a three-part webinar series, and in this webinar, we are really going to introduce insights. This is really going to be all about what insights is and a feature function review of what actually goes on inside of insights. So our agenda for today is kind of just a broad discussion of what insights is, a technical overview of how insights is architected and how it actually works, which is one of the reasons why it's such a different product than what you're probably used to using. Then we're going to really dive into the heart of insights, and that's all about asking and answering questions. So we're going to step through all of the visualization, both map, tools, graphs, charts that you can do inside of insights through specific examples. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the roadmap for insights for the future, and then how you can get insights if you don't already have it. And then we're going to wrap up and do a little preview of our second webinar. So like Krista said, please feel free to put any of your questions in the chat and we'll try to get to them as time allows at the end of the webinar. So kind of starting off, you know, this is a quote from Art Haddad, who is the CTO of Location Analytics here at Esri. And, you know, data is important. However, it's not as important as the answers it provides and the stories that it tells. So all of us inside of any industry we've worked in, you know, after 30 years of using things electronically, we have all of this data, these rich data sources of consumption, of inspections that we've been collecting both paper and electronically. And the question is not so much now, how do we get data, but how can we actually use that data? How can we make that data the focus of our business to answer questions and essentially make us as utilities and as organizations function better and more effectively? And that's kind of where insights comes in. This idea of our insights for ArcGIS is really not underestimating how simple things are. So when you see insights today and I start presenting it, you'll see that it's a really simple, straightforward interface, but it's actually very deep. So the simplicity of insights allows us to do things very quickly that may have taken multiple steps or tools inside of ArcGIS. With insights, we really want to kind of do a couple of things. We want to, you know, use the power of spatial analysis that Esri GIS technology provides to visualize and look at information more closely. We want to combine both analysis and visualization. So instead of focusing solely on a map-based view, we want to look at a map, but also the data that's behind it in a way that's linked together so that we can find and see patterns that emerge from that data. And then we also want to use all this data that we have and all this analysis power we have to actually learn something, to make decisions and to push those decisions and that information out to the people, the stakeholders in the public and our organizations that need to use it. So Insights for GIS is really all about taking that data, not only just that spatial data that as GIS professionals we're all used to using, but also the tabular data that we've collected over years and actually visualizing and analyzing that data. This is done on Insights through a series of pages and cards where you can perform analysis workflows and actually look at individual pieces of analysis, maps, charts, tables, and graphs. And Insights can consume data, as you'll see, from really a variety of sources, from typical features that you're used to seeing inside of ArcGIS to information coming from XLS files or the living atlas to the world. And you can even connect Insights back to your own enterprise database systems like SQL, Oracle, SAP HANA, and Teradata. So really the basic Insights architecture is that Insights resides as an application inside of ArcGIS Enterprise. So if we take a look at this little chart we have here, we can see what essentially is a base deployment of ArcGIS Enterprise with a portal, an ArcGIS server, and a relational data store. So Insights installs components across all three pieces of this architecture. Inside of Portal, that's actually where the Insights browser application that we're going to be using today exists. So that's where users go in, work with Insights, do their analysis, and use the data. Server is where the data is drawn and processed, or drawn and sent out to people for visualization, like in every other type of ArcGIS server application. But what's really different about Insights is its use of the data store, and that specifically is that relational data store. That's where all of your workbooks inside of Insights are stored, but more importantly, that's where all of the queries and questions you ask are actually processed. What it allows for is a much faster return of large amounts of data than what we're used to seeing inside of traditional desktop-based GIS. So kind of digging down into that, how Insights really works. So if we ask, say, a question, how many customers do I have in Tennessee? Traditional desktop GIS, you would go out to your database server, you would bring back all of your customers in the entire United States, and then on your desktop in ArcMap or ArcGIS Pro, you would say, show me all customers states that equal Tennessee. So you're bringing back all of the records from your server, doing the analysis completely on your desktop and getting the result. Well, the way that Insights works and how it's a little bit differently is that instead of bringing all 2 million records, you're actually going to be sending that query into the relational data store. So instead of bringing all 2 million records and querying, you're actually just going to send what customer state equals Tennessee. The processing and the answering of that query will be done inside of the data store, and it will simply return you the resultant information, whether that is simply a number that shows those people, or the actual features that represent those 57,000 customers. So this is why over the next, half an hour, you're going to see Insights do things that may have taken a number of minutes to do inside of ArcGIS Desktop very quickly. So that's a real brief look at the actual technical architecture of Insights. So let's dig into an overview of some of the capabilities of Insights. Now what I'm going to do first is I'm going to step through each of the pieces that I'm going to be going over, and then we're actually going to hop into Insights and run through a feature by feature functionality of how each one of these items works. So first off, the thing that everyone's going to do is add data to Insights. So when you add data to Insights, whether it's from a feature layer, the Living Atlas, SQL Server, or something like an XLS file, it's going to allow you to add these in as separate data sets. Not only as separate data sets, but say, for example, if you have a nested number of layers inside of a featured data set, you'll be able to load those in individually if you want. Insights also really brings the power of relationships to the forefront, the ability to join spatial to non-spatial data through one-to-one or many-to-one relationships. This is accomplished through something called the relationship view inside of Insights. It's a very straightforward view that allows you to very quickly take information in tabular format and join it to your spatial data. And Insights is all really about this interactivity. This is going to be an example of how everything really is just drag and drop. I'm going to be doing this in a little bit, but I like showing this because it kind of just lets you focus on a single example of how we're taking information, summarizing it, and aggregating it, all through simple drag and drop mechanics. No tools, no buttons to click. Very, very simple, 3 clicks or less to do all these types of things that you're used to doing inside of GIS. But what the core of Insights really is its analysis capabilities. And that all starts with questions. How are things distributed? How is it ranked? Why is one thing occurring? Maybe I know the answer to that. Maybe I have an idea of what that answer is going to be. But until I can actually look at the data, both spatially and non-spatially, I may not be able to answer that question. So by digging down, when we ask a question, we see a number of tools that exist to allow us to help answer that question. And those tools return us with things like histograms, charts, graphs, density maps to help us answer and look at those individual questions. Insights also comes with a set number of spatial analysis tools that we'll be going through that lets you do some of the most common tasks inside of GIS. Filter, aggregation, buffer and drive times, enriching data from the living atlas of the world, doing things like calculating density and also nearest calculations. And Insights also allows you to create impactful maps. So because of its use of our underlying spatial technology, we can use all of the base maps that exist inside of ArcGIS Online. And we can also symbolize things that we're used to seeing them by lines, points, and polygons. And digging even deeper, we can visualize individual maps based on what makes the most sense. So by using things like single symbols, but also going to our more traditional choropleth mapping, size and amounts, unique values, and even things like heat maps. And then also inside of Insights, there's this whole suite of charts and graphs that you can use. So there's your very common charts that you're used to seeing, like bar and column charts, but also more exotic charts, like bubble charts, donut charts, and even deeper analysis, things like histograms and scatter plots, using time series data, and then also looking at data relationally through things like chord diagrams. And I'll be getting into all of these in just a moment. Along with all of the visuals you can do inside of Insights, Insights also allows you to track the progress of everything that you've done. We all know as we're stepping through workflows that we can do a lot of steps and sometimes get confused as to what we're seeing. You'll never really lose your place when you're using Insights because you can always go back and see how you got to the location that you are. You can also use these models to update your data and change individual parameters inside of each one of those data sets. And lastly, everything that you create in Insights can be shared out for people to see. You can easily print these, but you can also share them as pages to your organization, and you can embed them inside of inside of story maps. Also, any of the data that you create in Insights by joining layers, by doing filters, you can save out as their own individual feature layers inside of ArcGIS Online or inside of Portal for ArcGIS. So this allows you to take some of the information you've created inside of Insights and share it out with the rest of the organization to be used in web app builder applications, maps, dashboards, and the other things that are available inside of Portal for ArcGIS. So that's enough slides for right now. I'm gonna hop in and we're actually gonna start walking through each one of these pieces of Insights to show you exactly what it's all about. So this is Insights for ArcGIS. This is the front page to the application. We can see that here we're looking at a number of different workbooks. The workbooks in blue are the workbooks that I have created, while the workbooks in orange are the workbooks that I can see inside my organization. Now, since I'm an administrator inside my organization, I can see every single workbook that exists. But if I was not, I would only be able to see these shared workbooks that have been shared out with the entire organization. I have the ability to filter these by whether they're mine or others, and I can search through them as well to find an individual workbook. But for right now, I'm going to create a brand new workbook. So the second that I create this workbook, we're going to be presented with a dialog that asks us to bring information into it. So this is that add data dialog for inside of Insights. So you can see I have my content I can add. I can add contents from groups in my Portal for ArcGIS instance. I can bring in information from my organization at large, but also information from Esri's Living Atlas of the World. For example, if I wanted to bring in zip codes, I could just search and I'm given a number of options for bringing in zip code geographies. So you don't necessarily have to have your own information in order to start using some of the capabilities of Insights. I can also connect up to other database systems. In this case, we can connect it to SQL, Oracle, SAP HANA, or Teradata. And lastly, I can bring information directly from Excel or CSV files directly into Insights. So that's what I'm actually going to do. I'm going to browse my computer, and I have a file here that has 10 years of consumption data for a water utility. This ends up being about 220,000 records. I'm very quickly going to add this in directly from my XLS sheet. This will take just a moment to load into my map here. Now you'll see that as this is loading, once we're actually inside of Insights, I'm on a page. That's essentially what this is. You can add one or multiple pages to any given workbook. And inside of each of these pages, that's where your cards will be contained, which is where you perform your analysis and view your data. So now that we've loaded it in the sheet, we can see it comes through with all of the data that was inside of that Excel document. And I'm just gonna start making some information, pulling some information out of this directly without any type of spatial component. So the first thing I wanna do is I just wanna look at my consumption based on my read date. So very quickly by dragging onto Insights, it's going to create this time series chart that shows the average consumption for each one of the consumers in this area for any given year over the last 17 years. So right now we're looking at completely non-spatial data. I can break this down even further and say I want to look at something like my year and my month and my consumption to see if I can pull any patterns out of that. So what we see here is we have a lot of data, but we also have one that's very, very large. This would be a no data value. So I can very quickly go in and remove this no data value and start looking at my information a little bit more cleanly. So immediately within a few minutes of having this data loaded into Insights, we can see that there's two outliers here, March of 2002 and January of the year 2000. Looks like that these may be data issues, or maybe there was something strange going on during these time periods. So even though this is an Excel file, it actually does still contain an X and a Y coordinate. So I can take this file and I can turn it into an actual location enabled file. So by clicking on the three dots next to anything in the table of contents, I'm brought up with this context menu. In this instance, I'm going to choose enable location. I'm using coordinates, but I could also use things like an address or a geography like a zip code. As soon as I run this enable location, it's going to take that XY location and actually create those coordinates inside of Insights. So now I can view that information, view that 17 years of consumption information as a map. And if you'll notice there when it drew, it populated every single dot. So essentially, every read of all 200,000 of those records is being drawn as an individual dot. So on this map right here, this contains approximately 200,000 dots. So let's dig a little bit deeper into what we can actually do in this table of contents. For that, I'm going to bring in some other information. So I'm actually going to pull in some features from a water utility. You can see that Insights automatically is going to add those to your map. I'm actually going to get rid of that at this moment. And the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust the name of my XLS table because I want it to be a little bit more descriptive. At the same time, I also know I'm going to be interested in looking at my service requests and specifically the problem code. So I'm going to adjust that name so it's a little bit more clean as well too. So that's all done inside of the table of contents. I also want to affect some filters on this as well. So I'm going to add a leak filter. And I only want to look at information. I only want to look at information for the past about 3 years. So I'm going to add a date filter as well on this. Now, when you do filters inside of the table of contents on Insights, that's now reflected on all of the information, all of the products you create from that data set. So we've gone from, in this instance, about 300,000 service request records down to the 4,400 service requests for leaks during that 3-year time period. Now, if I specifically, excuse me, if I specifically wanted to only look at information on an individual card, I can do something like this. So I can remove my problem code from filter from my table of contents. And now if I bring this data onto a card, I can actually perform a filter on this card that will only pass through this card and any derivative products I make from it. So you can do filters on both the data set as a whole or on the resultant analysis of an individual data set. So I'm going to do a filter on this. And in this instance, I want to look for service requests, problem code, for exposed lines, which would be something that I really want to make sure that I'm focusing on. So do my exposed line. So now I'm only seeing the 26 exposed line service requests for the last 3 years. So now if I would do any further analysis on this card, it would be only on the exposed lines from this card, but I can still work on my service requests on any other card using all of the data sets that are available to me. So along with being able to filter information, we may also want to do some of those relationships to look at data. Now, I know I already created this as a location-enabled table, but I actually don't want to look at every single consumption record. I want to look at them based on the service connection. So I want to see a time series of service connections, water consumption over the last 16 years. So I can do that inside of this Insights relationship view. In this instance here, I'm choosing my highline consumption and my service connections, and I'm presented with a very simple joining dialog. In this instance, I'm going to use a count number as my join field, and I can use an intersect, all join, or a simple left or right join. So very much what we're used to doing inside of ArcMap. So as soon as I finish this join, Insights is actually going to create a new data set that has the combined total of both of those data sets inside of it. So the information for all of my data is now inside of this one joined feature class. And I can start doing things like this, looking at my read date and my consumption based on an individual meter. So I can do that. So this is my consumption for everybody, but now because I actually have those fields from my service connection, I can break down and look at things like an individual service address. And I can see my water use, my average consumption over the last 16 years for an individual service address inside of my organization. So information that is being viewed through a many-to-one relationship where I can see spikes and drops in average monthly use. So for this person, I can see they have a couple of strange spikes that we may want to actually look at to see if these were true or if these are actually some type of data ghosts that we're seeing. So along with doing all these joins, a big part of Insights is visualization. So let's start looking at that. I'm actually going to bring in some more data here from another water utility. And we're going to look at how we can look at data in different ways. So the data is brought in as our meters, and then we also have a consumption table. So I'm very quickly going to join those meters in that consumption table together based on an account ID. Now that's happened, I can actually start to symbolize this information by some of the fields that are available now through this join. So I'm going to add my new data set to my map, and I'm going to symbolize this by our inefficient use field. So you can see that the default is counts and amounts by size. We have the ability to set our own classifications and use all of the classification types that we're used to seeing inside of the rest of ArcGIS. We can change the number of classes, and we can even normalize our data if we have fields to allow for that normalization. I'm going to expand this card a little bit. We'll zoom in a little bit on it. So this is a nice visualization because you can start to see on a block by block level which people have the highest inefficient use. But if we actually want to make this a little bit more general, we can do things like changing this over to a heat map. So we can see where we have areas that have pockets of inefficient use that are a little bit more concentrated in some of the other areas in the organization. Along with visualizing point features in heat maps and counts and amounts and sizes, we can also look at line and polygon information as well too. In this instance here, I'm going to bring my material type in from our mains and laterals feature class, and we'll see that Insights is going to automatically symbolize that based off of that material type field. Now, I may not really like the way this looks that much, so I'm gonna up the size of these a little bit so they stand out more. And then maybe I want to give this a background that's a little bit more neutral. So like the light gray background, so I can really see what these service connections and these laterals and these lines look like. You can also do things like adding in my imagery, and we can actually get a good representation of what information looks like actually out in the field. And these base maps are actually adjustable on a card-by-card basis. So you're beginning to see a pattern here of simple drag and drop one-step operations to look at visualizations, to look at things like service requests. We establish a problem code of leaks here. And that applies forward through as well to some of our analysis tasks. So in this instance here, I've pulled through a couple pieces of data. And if I wanted to actually filter down and aggregate these service requests on a parcel by parcel basis, I can do this all just through drag and drop mechanics inside of Insights. So I can drag my service requests onto my first card and run a spatial aggregation. Very quickly, this is going to aggregate my 4,434 service requests onto my 100,000 parcels. And I can break that down even further by selecting the geography of a polygon, in this instance, the bend area, which is a pressure zone, and filtering that selected information by that feature. So very quickly moving things around in a map to perform analysis without having to go through a number of tools, really focusing down on a particular area that I am interested in. So I'm going to hop out of this one now, and I'm going to focus more on the visualization, not so much on the map side, but on the chart and graphing side. So I'm going to hop over to an existing workbook that I have, and we can see here that I actually have some information already created inside of this workbook. So we have our very standard bar graph and summary table, but we also have options for a number of other different types of graphs. So your standard column chart, if that's how you'd like to see your information. We can make this look more interesting by actually changing this symbology to be unique symbols. And you can see that this information is all tied together. So I click on one of these charts, the rest of them will highlight that selected information. We also have options like donut charts, which are really good for showing percentages of a whole. For example, we have 12 total selected leak records here, and we're seeing how much of a percentage each one of these different types is of that whole. We can also look at things like tree maps, which I'm particularly fond of because it's a very clear view of the proportions of different pieces of data that we're working with. And we can also look at the same type of data and have something like a bubble chart. So once again, showing proportions, but in just a much different fashion. When I'm creating pages and insights, I like to mix and match some of these together just to keep variation on my map to keep it interesting. We also have things like box plots, where we can very quickly see and identify patterns. For example, here we're looking at the number of leaks based on the type of development here. And very clearly we can see that there's a high outlier inside of our condos, showing that we have this one condo development that has an extremely large number of leaks. So things like box plots can really help you see not only those medians and means, but any outliers that your data may have very quickly. Now, along with looking at information just through simple graphs and charts, we can also look at it through more complex methods. So we can look at things through like a line graph. And in this line graph, we see very clearly that we have this uptick in the number of leaks in age of development, spiking in houses, single family houses built in 1987 in this area have the highest number of service requests for leaks. We can also see that things like condos don't actually even start having any service requests for leaks until condos built in the year 2007, which would lead us to believe that development for condominiums occurred later in this area than for other types of interest or housing. We can also look at things like chord diagrams, which are very interesting diagrams. And I'm actually going to cut this data down a little bit to make it a little bit more clear. So I'm going to choose my year built, and I'm going to select just the past 10 years of data. So now inside of this chord diagram, we can very easily see this relationship between residential condos built in 2007 and a large number of leaks. We can also look at any other individual layer, years, and kind of see the correlation and the connection, the connection between that year of housing development being built and the type of house it was and the number of leaks that occurred on that year. We can look at the same information in things like data clocks, and what these are going to show us, is more of just a slice by slice view of a couple of different pieces of information. So here we're seeing that we definitely have this large spike in leaks in 2007 and condos built in 2007, but we also have a spike in leaks in single family households built in 2007. And there's multiple ways you can visualize this information. Also using things like a heat chart, which is the same type of visualization, just presented in a different manner. So really, the amount of visualization and analysis you can do inside of the boxes, inside of the cards and insights, is varied and wide. And the development team is adding to these in every release. I believe in the last release, the chord, the heat chart, the data clock, the chord diagram, and the box plot were all new at version 2 of Insights. So Insights also contains a large number of analysis tools. So I'm going to hop over to one other workbook to start showing those. So these analysis tools are the tools you can use to do those simple pieces of GIS analysis that we're all used to doing inside of ArcGIS Desktop or ArcGIS Pro. In this instance, I have loaded some data up from rainfall sites in southern Florida. And I'm interested in looking at the amount of population that lives within a certain distance of a number of these sites. Specifically, I'm going to look at the top couple of sites from a rainfall event that we had in 2015. So I'm just going to select these interactively inside of my summary table. And then inside of the map, I'm actually going to click on this action button. This action button allows us to start looking at the different tools we have available to us. So I can either pick an individual tool, or I can follow this path of finding answers. So if I click what's nearby, it gives me all of my tools that are related to that. And specifically, I want to use my create buffer and my drive time tool. So I'm going to use a fixed distance. I'm going to give this a distance of 5 miles. I'm selecting my location from my map, and I'm going to run this. So now I noticed that I made a mistake here, and I should have really dissolved all of these so I could look at the entire population being bothered or being affected by this. So I can really quickly make that change. I can turn off this data set, go back to my action button, and just simply run that again since my data is already all selected. Only this time I'm going to choose dissolve. Now this will take a moment longer to do. But in the end, it's going to give me a dissolved polygon boundary of all of the areas within 5 miles of these 9 selected sites. What's interesting about how this is done inside of Insights is that this is all done just through clicking. These tools are all being run right on top of the data as you choose it interactively, not having to go into any real deep context menus to use them. Now that I have my information selected, I actually want to do some joining into some of that external data. So I'm going to use my enrich data tool, and I'm going to select my location buffer. I'm going to open up my data browser. And in this instance, I'm going to select United States. Now I'm going to be presented with all of the different variables that we have in the United States. I think right now there's about 750 different variables that are being maintained by both Esri and the US Census Bureau. In this instance, I'm interested in looking at my 2017 total population and my 2017 total housing units. As soon as I apply and run this, Insights is going to append this data onto my actual data set. And we can actually start to look at the result of this information. So we can see that inside of these buffers, I have about 1.2 million people and 581,000 households. So that's just one tool for actually getting at information that may exist outside of your organization. You can also use the tables inside of the information inside of data you have in Insights to create new fields and discover new information. For this example, I want to actually create a ratio of outdoor water use to indoor water use so I can find customers who are relatively inefficient with their outdoor water consumption. So inside of Insights, I can go to my Find Answers and ask how these things are related. And inside of there, I can calculate a ratio. In this instance, I'm choosing my location. I'm choosing my outdoor water use over my indoor water use. Let's call this new field our usage ratio. Insights is actually going to create this field on the fly inside of our data set. So we can see that new usage ratio field. I can immediately use that field to start looking at my data in a different manner. So I'm going to symbolize this by my usage ratio. This is going to give me a count and amount of my usage ratio, and I can zoom in and start to see areas with people that have a relatively high usage ratio. I also don't have to use the tool to create these fields. I can do this right inside of my table view in Insights. So if I click Add Field here, I'm actually going to change this to a percentage. So I can add in my outdoor use divided by my indoor use, times that by 100. And I can run this to actually create that field right from my table view. So there's multiple different ways that you can create these ratios and these calculations and fields inside of your Insights data. So if a piece of information doesn't exist in the data set you load, it doesn't mean that you won't be able to add it in the future by using other pieces of data in your information in order to create those ratios or other fields. So lastly, here inside the analysis tools, I want to look at what I think is one of the coolest analysis features inside of Insights, and that's the near function. So for this, I'm interested in looking at my water mains and laterals and my service connections. And what I actually want to do is I want to find which service connections or which laterals are closest to each one of my service connections inside of this data set. And I can do that using the Find Nearest tool inside of Insights. So I'm going to select my service connections as the data set I'm looking from. I'm looking for water mains and laterals. I want to limit this to only the very first one that it finds within 200 feet of every service connection. So when I run this data set, my resultant data will give me the closest lateral or water line with to each one of the service connections in my feature area. So I'm actually going to remove these other two data sets to clean it up a little bit. And we can see here that we now have all these little tiny laterals that are selected that are within 200 feet of an individual service connection. And along with being able to visually see those, all the information about that service connection has also been appended onto those lines as well too. So we now have a feature class that shows all of my laterals along with the closest service connection to each one of those laterals. So I can start to do really neat things with it, like actually looking at what my laterals are made of to see if I can figure out which service connections may have older types of laterals that may need to be replaced. So if I look at my summary table, we can see the vast majority of these are PVC and some copper, but we do have a number of ductile iron service connections still left. So this would allow me to actually go into this data set, search for my material, and filter out so that I can see only those service connections that still have ductile iron service lines running to them. I can change the symbology so they stand out a little bit more. So now very quickly, I've narrowed down the service connections in my organization that may need to be looked at to replace their service lines to avoid leaks or other things like that. Now, I've shown really a lot of stuff inside of Insights today. You've seen basically almost every feature that exists inside of the product, and you may start wondering, well, how do I keep track of what's actually going on inside of any one of these given workflows that I do? And the answer to that is using this Insights analysis or analysis view. So it's actually, I can see in this instance every single thing that I did to get to the point where I am inside of my workbook. So I can see each individual filter, spatial aggregation, and even the stylizations. And if I get a new data set, I can simply hit this refresh data set button and it will rerun all these analyses. I can also go into any one of these individual pieces. I can update them. So for example, I'm looking at my leaks by my building type. But if I wanted to change it to say something like my primary land use code, I can do that inside of this analysis view. So once I've changed to that primary land use code, Insights is going to go through and update each one of these individual tasks that I've done with the new parameters. It's going to give me a whole new set of data based off of the exact same parameters I used to determine this based off of the building type. So very quickly, I can switch gears of analysis and see if I can get any information out of different pieces. You can also share this information out as you can print it out, you can share out this model to be used by other people in your organization, or you can share it out as a page. And when you share this out as your page, it actually creates an item inside of Portal for ArcGIS that allows you to view that page. You can also actually take that page and embed it into an iframe like you can with any other of our applications. So that is really a step-by-step feature functionality of what Insights does. So let's switch gears a bit and look at the roadmap for Insights. Something that's very interesting about this product is that it's being developed on a truly agile methodology with releases almost every 2 months. So you'll see a dot release every 8 to 10 weeks of Insights, and then version releases in line with the large releases of the ArcGIS platform. So right now we're on version 2.0 of Insights. In progress right now is version 2.1. Version 2.2, which is expected to come online in late 2017 or early 2018, will include the Insights for ArcGIS Online. I don't really have much information about that, but possibly in one of the next webinars I'll be able to talk more about it. And version 2.2 in January 2018 will be updates for Insights for ArcGIS Enterprise. Once again, with those new releases coming approximately every 2 months. So the requirements for Insights for ArcGIS as it stands right now, not talking about the ArcGIS Online version of Insights, is that it requires ArcGIS Enterprise 10.5 or higher base deployment. So that would include a portal, at least one ArcGIS server role, and one relational data store. When Insights for ArcGIS Online comes out, some of those requirements may change, but I don't exactly know what those are right now. In terms of licensing for Insights, Insights is a single seat user license for each one of those Insights users. It also does require a level 2 named user to perform those analysis tasks and consume those credits for enriching data. And if you are an organization that had an ELA in existence before December of 2016, you may have a limited number of Insights licenses available. So if you'd like to get going and using those licenses, please talk to your account representative and they can help you out. And then as always, if you would like Esri's help in implementing Insights or really anything, we can do this through either EAP engagements, a specific professional services engagement, and if you would like, we can even manage your entire Insights deployment through Esri Managed Services and something that we call Insights as a Service. So if you'd be interested in any of those as well too, please talk to your account representative. So really to wrap up here in summary, Insights is about taking all of that data that you've collected and exposing it to some of the core exploratory and interactive spatial analysis that exists inside of the ArcGIS platform. The things that we have always done in ArcGIS Desktop now being done on massive amounts of data over a browser. It really is focused on taking that tabular and non-spatial data and finding a focus in GIS on it. So going beyond that basic mapping that we're used to doing and really looking at all that information and data using the full power of the spatial analysis that we have available to us. And in using Insights for almost a year now, it really is the best to start with the questions you have. Why is a certain development experiencing so many leaks? Where are people using the most amount of water? Do I have any locations that may be affected by flooding if I'm concerned about my architecture or my infrastructure? And also questions like, if I put a plant in this location, what are the demographics of my customers that will be affected by this plant? Taking those questions and using Insights to get the answers to those questions, being able to easily document the workflows that you took to get to those answers. And then lastly, sharing that information and those stories out with the rest of the people in your organization and your customers, whoever they may be. So that's kind of the end of this webinar. A lot of what I've showed here in terms of feature functionality will be breaking out into longer analytical workflows in the next 2 webinars. Our next webinar is going to be focused on how some of our water customers have used Insights for ArcGIS. Hopefully we'll have a couple of those customers able to speak during that webinar, and we'll also be using some of the examples that we found during our Insights forums that we held earlier this year in Philadelphia and in Tennessee. That webinar, for all of your information, is on November 8th, 2017 at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. That is the week after daylight savings times ends. So feel free to get that extra hour of sleep that Saturday night. But without anything further, questions?
Hi, Derek. We have several questions that have come in, so we'll just get started. One of our first questions is asking about subdomain values and SQL view tables. How does Insights approach those?
So I do not know the answer to that question of how it would actually look at SQL views, but that is a question that I can forward to the development team to get an exact answer of how Insights handles SQL views and subdomains and things like that.
Okay, great. So Robert, we will answer your question and post it as part of our Q&A document. So keep an eye out for that. Okay, another question we have is about schema locks. So you were showing these fields being created on the fly. Do schema locks affect that?
So they do not. So the way that Insights works is that when you create that workbook, it's actually creating kind of a temporary copy of that data inside of your data store while you're doing that analysis. So even though you're adding new fields onto an existing data set inside of your data store, it's not actually going to lock out that original data set. Once that workbook is saved and you close it out, you'll be able to look at the original data again and use it how you want. And when you open that workbook back up, it'll reestablish all that information that you created, those fields you added, and you can start using it that way. At the same time, if you added a bunch of fields through, say, analysis or calculations, you actually wanted to have that data set be available to everyone else in your organization, you can use that shared data. You can use that shared data dialog to push information out. So, and I did just get an IM from one of the developers of Insights, and yes, they do work with views. So I'll probably be hitting him up to answer some of these questions more as well. So.
Thanks, Derek. We have another question about the schema that you were showing, or the ability to update your data using that graphic that you showed during your demo. What if our customers had data that was regularly updated? Could they automate that update?
I don't know the exact answer to that question. The data can be automatically updated into the data store, and I believe that they would have to just hit that refresh update button on the workflow to push the information through.
Okay, so we're saying that if the data is updated in the data store, then when you refresh your workflow, it should update.
Correct. And okay. I was sent a clarification to the previous question about schema lock. So it actually doesn't make a copy of the data. It creates a view of the data inside of the data store. So that's how you're able to avoid the schema locks.
Okay, great. We still have questions coming in, and we have a few more minutes, so we're just going to keep on it. There is a question about credits. Do our customers need to be concerned about credits when they use Insights?
So the biggest consumer of credits through Insights is going to be when you start touching those outside data sources. And the credit load is relatively small unless you're looking at doing enriches of millions and millions of records. You're probably not going to run into too many credit issues. The same credit calculation that would pertain to any enrichment done in ArcGIS Online or Portal for ArcGIS falls through to Insights. So you can use that credit usage as a guide as to what would be used for that enriched data.
Thanks, Derek. You showed a lot of graphs and charts during your demo. Is there a way to set defaults for how these graphs and charts look so that an organization can have a consistency in how this data is being shown?
At this time, I do not believe that there is.
Okay, great. I guess we will wait for that functionality. So if you guys have ideas or you're looking at changes, once you start using Insights, be sure to interact with the Esri team and your Esri account representative, because we're definitely always looking for that customer feedback of how it can be improved. So we have a couple more questions. Do you know if, and I know you said you didn't know very much about Insights for ArcGIS online yet, but do you have any idea as far as, is that going to be accessible to developer accounts so that they can work in it?
I do not know the answer to that question. We can pass it on to the Insights development team and get an answer to that, though.
Okay, great. Several of the questions are concerning this webinar and if it's going to be available online later on. So I just want to make sure you guys know that we are recording it. It takes about a week, maybe a little more, to get it processed here on our end, and then it will be posted online, similar to our other meetup webinars. So just look for that email that will provide the link and check in about a week. If you have any problems with that, just feel free to email me and I will help you get access to the recorded version.
So I also want to point out that there are 2 handouts that kind of go along with this webinar. Some tips and tricks to jumpstarting your spatial analysis or analytics, and then also a data visualization options at Insights 2.1, which is a really great cheat sheet that Linda created to kind of show how each of the charts and graphs work. So I would strongly suggest you download each one of those. They're both really good documents for helping you get a quick handle on what's going on inside of Insights.
Thanks, Derek. Okay, that's going to be it for the webinar today. Please join us for our second and third webinars in this series, and we will definitely get to those questions that were not answered and make sure that the Q&A document is posted online. If you have any concerns, questions, or have problems finding the second and third webinar registration information, just shoot me an email and I will help you out. Thank you, and I hope to see you in our second webinar.